Hello and welcome back to Brick Army. My name's Steve and today we have the Sluban T80. And what I didn't realise when I bought this, apparently it's a 2-in-1 model. There is a slight variation, you can see on the turrets, slight variation between the two. So I'm probably going to build both of them, but we'll see what happens. Sluban, as some of you may be aware, is one of my favourite companies. It's responsible for the Mi-24 Hind, which I loved, absolutely adore that model. So I have high hopes for this. So without further ado, let's crack on and build. Early design and production of the T80 was complex at best, but boiled down to this: competing design bureaus and political factions with the army stuck in the middle. First designed to replace the T-64, which had been an unusually high-tech tank by Russian standards, was also notoriously unreliable, particularly its engine and suspension. The T-80 was the world's first gas turbine production tank, beating the American Abrams by several years, and this was the principal reason why the Soviet military didn't initially want it. Simply that its fuel consumption was considered unacceptable. They also preferred the T-72, which had a more conventional diesel engine. This was important for logistics and commonality of parts. However, the different factions within the Soviet hierarchy supported one side or the other, and the Soviet military ended up being stuck with three main battle tanks: the T-64, the T-72, and the T-80. The T-80 was based on the T-64, with an attempt to fix the issues that plagued the earlier model, as well as some details were ripped off the T-72, which had entered production earlier than the T-80. Entering service in 1976, its initial production run was powered by the GTD 1000T turbine, producing 1000 horsepower, which meant that the first run of T-80s was actually less manoeuvrable than the T-72s. However, within a year, the design was changed to incorporate the new GTD 1000TF engine, which now meant that they were more manoeuvrable than the T-72s. In fact, there had been a continuous battle between the T-72 and the T-80, which left one better than the other until the next upgrade cycle, all through the 70s, 80s and 90s. The Soviet military finally came round to the idea of the T-80, with a simple twist to their battle order. With their doctrine of large amounts of fast-moving, hard-hitting armoured divisions sweeping across the northern European plain, they simply decided to give the T-80s to their best divisions, using the T-72s to provide flanking and reserve punch. Think of the tip of a spear as the T-80, and everything else of the spear blade as the T-72. In part, this is also down to the numbers of the two tanks. During its production period from 1976 to 2001, around 5,500 T-80s were produced. In comparison, during the similar sort of period, around 25,000 T-72s were produced. One of the many reasons for the lower amounts of T-80s was simply down to the costs per unit. The T-72, depending on the variant, coming in at around $500,000, while the T-80 is considerably more expensive, again depending on the variant, but around $3 million per tank. While overall the T-80 is generally considered to be the better of the two competing tanks, it achieved very poor export sales in comparison to the T-72. It was only after the fall of the USSR that T-80s were able to be sold for export. Unfortunately, they were considered too technical for many countries in comparison to the T-72, and sales were only completed to Pakistan, Egypt, Yemen, China and Cyprus. A number of T-80s did end up in other countries' hands. South Korea received some in lieu of debts from the USSR. The UK purchased some through a shell company, and this compares poorly to the T-72, which in 2023 is still operated by 42 countries. In an unusual twist of fate, a diesel-engine T-80, the T80UD, was developed by the Morozov Bureau in 1987, which solved a lot of the fuel consumption and range issues that the T-80 had without compromising its mobility. The Morozov Bureau is located in Kharkov, Ukraine, which meant that after the dissolution of the USSR, Ukraine actually had more of the newer T-80UDs than the Russians themselves. And then just to twist the knife a little bit further, the Ukrainians managed to make the T-80UD an export success. Despite the Russian invasion of Afghanistan lasting nearly 10 years, the T-80 was never deployed there. So the first used in anger by the Russians in 1991. Unfortunately, this was against themselves. In August 1991, an attempted coup against Mikhail Gorbachev sent the 4th Guards Tank Division with their T80Us and T80UDs onto the streets of Moscow to attack the Parliament building. The tank crews refused to fire on the building, directly forcing the coup to fail. During the Russian constitutional crisis, the T80s were again ordered to the Russian Parliament building in October of 1993 by President Boris Yeltsin, but this time did fire on it. The first taste of fighting an external foe came in the First Chechen War in 1994, which turned into an unmitigated disaster. The assault on the capital city of Grozny by T-80s without any infantry support showed up all the vulnerabilities of the T-80 in particular, and Soviet-era design generally. The lack of elevation of the gun, lack of reactive armour, lack and understanding of urban fighting and training, high fuel consumption from the majority gas-turbined T-80U models, as well as being pitted against many former USSR soldiers who were well aware of the T-80's weaknesses, led to a savage mauling. In fact, the General Lieutenant Alexander Galkin recommended to the Minister of Defence that no more T-80s should be built or brought after the war, though he reversed his position in 1996, saying that the T-80U was a better tank than the T-90. In defence of the T-80, it was being used in a reckless manner, as any fighting vehicle, but especially main battle tanks, are seriously compromised in any urban setting without infantry, and rather than leading any assault, should be providing backup to the infantry to clear away fortified positions. Also, T-72s were also used and suffered in a similar way to the T-80s in the same conflict, but for some reason did not attract as much of the blame. Again, probably this was something political. The wide expanses of the Ukraine should have been a far better hunting ground for the T-80s, as this was far closer to what they had originally been designed for. Plus, now after a period of rearmament, Russia had had time to train its tank crews properly. In September 23, it was announced that Russia would again be building T-80s after unveiling the latest upgraded model, the T-80 BVM. The introduction of modern Western weapons, like the Javelin, the NLAW, etc., by the Ukrainians came as a nasty surprise, exploiting the thinner armour on the top faces of the tank. As of April 2024, at least 818 T-80s have been confirmed destroyed. 133 of these are the latest BVM variant. Increasingly, Russian forces are swaddling their tanks with all types of cages that force an anti-tank weapon to explode prematurely, allowing a greater chance of survival for the tank and the crew, particularly as they are an autoloader with munitions inside of the tank and the turret that have proved to be extremely vulnerable to cook-offs, leading to an all-too-common turret explosion. However, there is no getting away from the fact that this, despite many upgrades, a tank that promised much but fell short when called upon, and perhaps will only really be remembered for some of the ideas it gave to its successors. Hi, and welcome back to the review. As you may have gathered from the speed build, I'm not happy bunny. And it's something of a minor miracle that I actually have something to show you, especially something with the gun sticking out to the front. Long and short of it is, this is very much a tale of two halves. The chassis, the body, absolutely fine, no problems whatsoever, really well done, really well built, nice and solid, not fragile, just the same as the MI-24. Turrets, different story. I appreciate that this is a round turret, or roundish turret, with essentially lumps sticking out of it, but I feel that there was a better way of designing this. The way they've gone about it is, to my mind, very fussy, and when you get a very fussy design, things tend to get very fragile with these types of things. So very difficult to work with. The gun was an absolute disaster. The crosspiece that goes down here and there is so tight with these four bits here that you really struggle to get them all lined up. And actually what ended up happening was that the two bits that were down here, the two sand colour bits, there's a bulge thing there, ended up splitting. And at one point I didn't think I was going to finish this, or at least didn't think I was going to finish it to the point where you were going to have a gun at the front. So can I recommend the Sluban T80? Probably not. I might have been unlucky. So if you've got one and it's sat there waiting to be built, you might get better than I have. But I think if you're in the market for a T80, might be worth exploring other options. I know this wasn't particularly expensive. It was just over £20. Whatever the price was, I'll pop it down here. I can't remember off the top of my head. On the positive side, Sluban do very nice minifigures. And one thing I do appreciate with the Sluban is that they give you lots of different shapes of the arms, so you can, it's slightly easier that way if you want to put a gun in the guy's hands and make it look relatively natural. But overall, as I say, I can't really recommend this particular model from Sluban. But there we go, this happens sometimes, and hopefully the next model we do will be a little bit better. But hopefully you've enjoyed the video, and hopefully you've enjoyed it more than I've enjoyed doing this video. And if you have, please like and subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you for the next one. You take care. Bye bye.